There were two NBA moves over the weekend that happened. First, the Knicks traded for Mikal Bridges from the Brooklyn Nets. Then, the Philadelphia 76ers upgraded Tobias Harris basically and went and got Paul George to form themselves a big three with Embiid, George, and Maxey. And the question is, now that the Boston Celtics, who essentially obviously ran for the Eastern Conference, ran for the Dallas Mavericks in 5 games in the NBA Finals, which team is closer to challenging them in the East, Philly or New York?
I think that Paul George upgrade is big for Philadelphia. That might finally get Embiid over that second round hump, like Paul George was able to do with Kawhi in Los Angeles. So I do believe that it will be the 76ers that are closer to challenging them. Obviously, the Knicks, they got all those Villanova guys. People are calling them the Villanova Knicks. And all those guys will probably have that chemistry because a few of them went to school with each other. But I think I'm going to give the edge to the Sixers on this one.
So, if you take off injuries, if we were playing a game of NBA 2K and you told me I didn't have injuries, I think this would be an easy question. I think it would be the Philadelphia 76ers. But when you factor in injuries and when you factor in what, in my opinion, is the new NBA, which is you don't need 3 all-stars. You need a superstar, you need a star, and then you need a bunch of role players that can shoot the hell out of the ball. By that nature, I think the Knicks are still the second best team in the East because I am going to almost go out on a limb and guarantee that by April, May, or June, one of Joel Embiid or Paul George is not going to be available because history tells me so. I have tried to believe in the Sixers for years, way back when they had Jimmy Butler, and they went to that 7-game series against the Toronto Raptors. Kawhi Leonard hit the amazing shot on the Raptors' way to winning the NBA championship, and I really felt like at that moment, that was the end of the Sixers as we knew it because they haven't came close to getting back to the championship ever since. Embiid did have one MVP year, but obviously it's been shortened by injury the last 2 years. And Paul George is a very good player, but again, he can somewhat be inconsistent in the postseason. He's had injury history himself. And so my question for Philly is, can they all stay healthy, and can Tyrese Maxey be the closer? On the contrary, as I see Josh Ungar has entered in, so we're going to bring Josh in. Let's see. Josh, I can't see you on the screen, but I see that you're in the StreamYard. Can you hear us? There we go.
Yeah, I got you, my boy. I got you.
All right, so we have just started our first topic here. That...
What you got?
Okay, so we first started our first topic. We were talking about which team's closer are challenging the Celtics, the Sixers, or Knicks. Chris is saying he believes it's the Sixers. I am saying I believe it is the Knicks because I think that the Knicks have deeper depth, and I don't trust Philadelphia, George, Embiid, Maxey to all be healthy by the time you get me to May and June. If injuries were not a thing, I'd probably pick Philly myself, but I don't trust that Embiid and George are going to be healthy. Let's swing it to you.
Has Joel Embiid ever shown that he can stay healthy come postseason time? No, he has not. Did the Knicks basically get handicapped in their series against the Indiana Pacers? Yes, they did. Because New York would have won that series probably in 5 games if they didn't have all their injuries. And I hate using injuries as an excuse, but in this case, it is the truth. So it is the New York Knicks because I love what the Knicks have done. As much as I hate to say it, because the Knicks are one of those teams I just can't stand, but they're trying everything they can to make me not dislike them because they're adding everybody from the Villanova championship teams in 2016 and 2018, which, as Chris knows, I am a huge Villanova.
Yes, that is very true. And I when you had first said that, when you had first told me that the Knicks were trying to make you not hate them, I'm like, is it because of the Villanova connection?
That is exactly the reason. You know me too well, Chris. You know me too well.
I'll tell you what, guys. Let me ask you both this question. We have the topic on the screen, obviously, which team was closer to Boston. I don't think either one of these two teams in a 7-game series could still beat Boston.
Yeah. I mean,
it's going to
I'd
be
give
hard.
New York a better chance, although I'd give New York the better chance between these two. But the problem is they just lost their biggest piece, or one of their biggest pieces, in Isaiah Hartenstein to the Oklahoma City Thunder. So that's a huge size element that you're losing, which means you're relying more so on Mitchell Robinson. And that's asking a
And the
lot of
one thing, well, the one thing that I do worry about the Knicks, and I know Mikal Bridges is a very good player. He came out on the scene while he was in Brooklyn all alone. He's never missed a game before in his entire NBA career. But I still wonder if Tom Thibodeau, like he did in Chicago, like he did in Minnesota, like we've seen him doing in New York, is he going to utilize that bench, or is he going to continue to wear those players down?
That's a tough call to make. I think he could utilize the bench more, but as we've seen, he doesn't really utilize them that well.
I mean, you have guys like Burks.
You know what you're going to get.
So,
right.
Go ahead, Josh. I'm sorry. You're on like a 5-second delay. So
yeah.
Yeah, the Wi-Fi down here in South Carolina is not that great, so I do apologize about that. But it does seem like Tom Thibodeau is more willing to use his bench. I mean, he kind of had to in that Indiana series, to be fair. Given, but still, like, he knows he has the bench. Granted, they had to lose part of it in Bogdanovich, but I don't think that's going to be a huge loss for the Knicks in the grand scheme of things. But when you look at this question, which team is closer to challenging the Celtics, the reason Boston won the finals last year, yes, they had Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. Well, that's the reason. It's not specifically Tatum and Brown, but they had the better wing players. You look at all the recent NBA champions: Boston, Tatum and Brown; Denver, Gordon and Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, or not Kentavious, Michael Porter; Lakers, Anthony Davis and LeBron James; Toronto, Pascal Siakam and Kawhi Leonard; Golden State, Kevin Durant; Cleveland, Kevin Love and LeBron James. You get my point. The trend has become, in order to win a championship, you need to have solid wing players. Forgot Milwaukee, Chris Middleton.
Well, I would say you're half right to that, because I think we've had two trends. I think one of the trends that you're right on, and we've known this for a long time, right? The best skill players in the NBA usually come from the wing. But the other trend that me and Chris were just starting to get into is, and Josh, me and you have, we talked about it this year with Boston. We talked about it last year with Denver. They were just deeper than everybody else. They had 5, 6, 7 guys, third, fourth guys off the bench, who on most teams could be, maybe a 6th or 7th guy. For the championship teams, they're your 9th or 10th guys coming in and being true 3 and D guys. And that's where I think the Knicks have more. And that's where, Chris, I want to throw it to you. Because outside of Maxey, Embiid, and George, what depth do the Sixers have? That's my biggest concern. I feel like they're building the NBA from 5 years ago and not the NBA of today.
Yeah, it does seem like they're trending backwards to that like early 2010s, like LeBron, Wade, Bosh kind of NBA. And while that can work to get you to a championship, I don't think it could win you one. But I definitely don't know what kind of depth the Sixers have.
Here's the thing with like that 2010 to 2014 Miami Heat team. They did have depth. Think about it. They had Mario Chalmers. They had Shane Battier. They had Birdman, Chris Anderson. They had Ray Allen, who made arguably the biggest shot in NBA history. They had Mike Miller, Mario Chalmers. So they still had depth to them. Whereas you look at Philadelphia, they've got Paul George, they've got Tyrese Maxey, they've got Joel Embiid. Who else do they have? Like, that's my biggest thing.
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Chris, do you got a response?
I do not. I don't even know who the Celtics or who the Sixers even have on their team. I don't really pay attention to them.
All right, well, the Sixers, they made this addition for Paul George. But, folks, we know about 5 years ago that Paul George was traded from the Oklahoma City Thunder to the Los Angeles Clippers. Kawhi Leonard then joins the Clippers from the Toronto Raptors in free agency. They were supposed to be, the next duo, the next great duo in LA. They were supposed to take down LeBron and Anthony Davis, and it just never happened. They got eliminated in the bubble. Then, Kawhi Leonard and Paul George had injuries for a few years. Then they're trying to reshake the roster. People forget Doc Rivers started off as their coach, and it turned into Tyronn Lue. So the whole Clippers thing, by my measure, is a disaster. I think the only experiment that you could put even close to this, and it may not be the biggest disaster, the biggest one may be the Brooklyn one, both of them actually, with Pierce Garnett and the other big three. I think it was like Deron Williams or somebody who they
Deron
brought
Williams
over.
was the third guy, and then you had the Durant.
It was Jason Terry.
Oh, Jason Terry. Yeah, they brought him over. But Deron was the third piece. Terry was more of a role player in that scenario. And then obviously the Durant, Kyrie.
I thought you.
Then obviously the Durant, Kyrie, Harden big three was a disaster. But by all means, I mean, this was, I hate to say it, I don't know if you guys agree with me. To me, the Kawhi-PG13 Clippers, they had one Western Conference Finals appearance, and that was without Kawhi Leonard on the roster. To me, it was an abject failure.
I definitely agree, mostly because they didn't bring an NBA championship. And I'm a huge Kawhi Leonard fan. I was happy that, at least he got them to their first ever conference finals appearance. Maybe if he doesn't get hurt, maybe they go to the NBA finals that season. Because I think they could have beaten the Suns if Kawhi's not injured.
Yeah, no, that I agree with you with. And I think the biggest what if from all of us maybe at this debate desk tonight is if COVID doesn't happen, because even though the Lakers were still the number one seed that year in the West, and they were pretty dominant, the Clippers had their number that year, and the Clippers had the depth and the size and the personnel to take down the Lakers. You wonder if the Lemon Pepper Lou incident and the Marcus Morrises and those Clippers that did not want to be in that bubble, if we don't have a bubble, I think that's the biggest Clipper what if is if they win the 2020 title.
I could definitely see that.
Josh, what about you?
By the way, the Sixers roster, they still have Kelly Oubre Jr. I think they still have Buddy Hield. And I believe they signed Eric Gordon, if I'm not mistaken. And Andre Drummond. So they're not an objective failure like what you're saying, Brandon. It's a cataclysmic failure for the LA Clippers. Not just because they never reached an NBA Finals, let alone won a championship, but they're still having to pay for that trade because they still owe the Thunder a couple. And in that deal, they gave up my league MVP from this past season, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. And we saw how he fit in beautifully in Oklahoma City. That's why the Thunder went out and traded for Alex Caruso and went out and signed Isaiah Hartenstein to go alongside Chet Holmgren. Plus, on top of that, one of the draft picks, Oklahoma City, from the Clippers. Who did they use that on? Arguably their second best player, Jalen Williams. So the Clippers, it is a cataclysmic failure. More so, I would say, so the package they gave up to get Paul George, but it's also a failure because of what you were saying, Brandon. They never reached the NBA Finals, let alone won a championship.
Well, again, they didn't even reach the Western Conference Finals. They only reached the Western Conference Finals the year that Kawhi was hurt in the playoffs. It was led by Paul George and Terrence Mann and Lou Williams. And, as Chris was saying, they gave Phoenix a shot in that series even without Kawhi. So, but to answer the question on the screen, I want to go back. I want to ask Chris the question first. When you compare this to other, recent NBA experiments that didn't miss out, I mentioned the two Brooklyn ones. I can't think of another one this seismic off the top of my head.
Phoenix.
Maybe one of you
can. Philadelphia.
Phoenix,
Philadelphia with Jimmy Butler.
But Phoenix has also only had 1 year together with Durant and that crew, I would say. Maybe give them another year or two. This is 5 years.
Yeah.
So, with that being said, do you think this was the worst quote-unquote experiment in NBA history?
Given how many years it was, because a lot of the experiments, because the first Brooklyn experiment ended after 1 year because Paul Pierce went to the Wizards. And then the Durant, Harden, Kyrie one, that went away after 2-3 seasons?
Yeah, I really consider Durant and Kyrie because there was the Durant, Kyrie, DeAndre Jordan. There was the Durant, Kyrie, Harden. There was the Durant, Kyrie, Ben Simmons for a little bit. So
right.
When I put that in, I think of it as Durant, Kyrie, third star. But regardless, we all know how it ended in Brooklyn. They're all no longer there.
Right.
Josh, do you agree with us?
Many different iterations of what happened in Brooklyn. I can't really say that's bigger than what happened with the Clippers because you don't have one definitive. If one was just Durant, Harden, and Kyrie, I would say that was bigger. But if you're taking Brooklyn as a whole, then no, I would go with the Clippers.
Okay, no, that's fair. And the thing is with the Clippers, and I don't know why. And listen, me and Josh, Chris have sort of talked about this a little bit, where it sort of felt like Kawhi and Paul George, they needed to separate. It was the end of an era. They weren't going anywhere. But if I'm the Clippers, I think personally, and Chris, I agree with you. I'm the biggest fan of Kawhi Leonard when healthy. But that's the key is when healthy, and he hasn't been healthy and God knows when. I think I would have chose to sign Paul George and try to trade Kawhi Leonard if I had the choice between the two. I don't know what they did. I don't know if they had those conversations. That's what I'm saying. If I ran the Clippers, I would have done everything I could to re-sign Paul and try to negotiate a deal to get Kawhi out of town.
I definitely agree there. Because you gave up more to get Paul George than you did for Kawhi. So not only did, your experiment not work, you gave up the guy you gave up the most to get.
And you got nothing back.
And you got nothing in return.
Right. But think about this for a second. We saw what the Clippers were when it was just Kawhi and Paul George. They did make it to the Western Conference Finals. I get it, Kawhi was injured, but they still got there. But when did it really blow up? When who got there? James Harden. Remember? That's when it really fell.
Yeah.
The Clippers this season. And I think that's part of the reason why Paul George decided to jettison and go to the 76ers is because he saw how it was going to work. He wanted no part of it, which, given James Harden's reputation, I'm sorry, but it totally makes sense. Think about it. Westbrook didn't want to play with him for long. Durant wanted to get away from him.
And so did Kyrie.
Kyrie wanted to get away from him.
None of his partners in Houston, everyone he worked with in Houston said they didn't want to play with him for long.
Right, Chris Paul wanted to get away from him. So, is that smells like a trend to me?
Two things here. It's amazing to me that Paul George basically chose, in my opinion, what could be the Clippers out east. I mean, if you think about it, we just talked about how Kawhi Leonard always gets hurt. I just mentioned at the top of the show, Joel Embiid always gets hurt. I mean, he could be in the exact same situation. The other thing is, what's very interesting, you guys talk about James Harden. I actually don't think Harden was the problem this year. I actually think Harden, for the first time in 3 or 4 years, probably had a very good year. I'm not saying that he had this great year and they should have stayed and he didn't contribute to the problem, but he wasn't the issue this year. The roster was the issue in itself this year. They didn't have a true point guard. It's why last year, and we're going to talk about this team in about 30 seconds here, our Cleveland Cavaliers extending Donovan Mitchell. But last year, before we even started this show, Josh knows this because I told him this trade, Chris, for about a year. Last year at this time, I was proposing the Cavs trade Darius Garland for Paul George straight up, and I think the Clippers might have did it because they needed a point guard. They still do, by the way.